You're listening to the God Life Culture Podcast, where faith
and what's trending collide. Welcome to the latest episode of the Guy Life Culture Podcast. This is Eddie.
What's up, everyone? This is Miguel, and we are so thankful that you are tuned in for another episode of the God Life Culture Podcast. If this is your first time listening, we want to say welcome, and we hope that you enjoy this episode today, this conversation that we are about to have. We want you to hit the subscribe button if this is your first time, so you can be notified every time we drop a new episode. If you are a returning listener, welcome back. Thank you for taking this journey with us. We are officially in the month of December,
Yes.
and there is the countdown for Christmas that is happening.
Yeah.
It is officially the Christmas season. We are excited. We are happy, but there's also a lot, right, happening, and a lot that, happens around this time of the year. And we are just winding down till the end of 2022.
Yeah, basically, like this is the time of year where everybody's like, "Oh wow, it happened so quickly. The year went by so fast. I can't believe it's already the next year." Like all those conversations start to happen, and there is validity to that. Like sometimes in the middle of it, you don't really get how fast time is moving, and I think that you find yourself in pockets throughout the years, like, oh, this season in my life, for example, feels like it's taking forever, and then there's other moments that just literally fly by, and I think that also specifically when you are involved in certain things, like church, for example, it's like the end of the year gets really crazy because like a bunch of camps, and then it's like the holiday parties, and it's the Christmas cantata, and then it's the this and the that, and then boom, it's New Year's, and then we're back into January. But through all of that, at the end of the day, I think that we are appreciative of those that take the time to listen to us or watch us if you're watching us on YouTube. And today we're going to be speaking about something that actually came about off of a comment that I made in our last episode. In the last episode, you were speaking about your experience with watching The Chosen, the first two episodes. And through that conversation, a thing that I mentioned brought to my mind this scenario of things that I wish I knew at the beginning of my Christian faith. I think that there's things that we can look back at and reflect and think about, man, if I knew that in the beginning, or if that was explained better to me in the beginning, or if, whatever the situation is, you kind of could have prepared yourself. And, at the end of the day, we don't have the ability to travel back in time. But these are tidbits that maybe you wish you had back then that we can talk about. And maybe someone who is in the beginning of their journey in their faith can kind of like grab onto that. And I think one of the things for me, which sounds controversial maybe to some people, is the fact that I didn't know how the church community can actually be very lonely. And what I mean by that is that there are different reasons for that. And I think that if we're looking at it from like a social, economic, not social economic, but like in a social standard, anytime you're in a facility where there are groups of people, work, school, wherever, there are pockets of people that kind of make friends with each other. And sometimes you don't find your group that you can maybe relate to. And then there's other people that find themselves maybe feeling lonely because of certain things that God is working in them with. Maybe God is working with them on being a little bit more conservative in certain areas in their life that other people are maybe a little bit more free or maybe like willy-nilly with. And they find that clash where they wish they could do this or they wish they could partake in that, but God is working with them in an area which is kind of like, no, you need to separate from that from a little bit. And it could also be as well because of people going through stuff. You have people that are going through really tough situations in their life or came to the work of the Lord with already so much baggage. And that process of restoration is a process that's between them and God. And sometimes that process in itself is very lonely. And I think that we speak about church as an idea of it being a community and everyone's here for you. And, it's going to be such a like warm and fuzziness of it. And I think that sometimes it's actually not. And I think that, if I had that realization growing up that it is okay to have moments of loneliness in my walk, in my faith, then I think it would have benefited me, because then I could have got over those feelings a lot quicker.
Yeah.
Rather than it being a complete shock that, oh, we're supposed to be a community, I should be feeling loved, and I'm not. It's kind of like it would help me get over it better.
Yeah. And I take that in a different way, because for me, when I think of wishing that I knew that this walk would have lonely moments, I think of more of the fact that there will be times where you feel like you are just the odd one, that you are the outcast. There will be times where you feel like you never fit in with people around you, right? And I remember always kind of feeling that way growing up, right? And that would affect me, where it would make me feel like, I was this crazy person, or like something was wrong, because there were just certain pockets of people or certain groups of people that I just felt like I couldn't fit in with, and a lot of it had to do because maybe I didn't talk the way they talked. Maybe I didn't do the things that they did. Maybe I didn't, joke in the way that they joked around, or what was fun to them wasn't necessarily fun to me because it wasn't what I thought was the right thing to do or the right thing to partake in. And I think a lot of times, we can forget that there is a clear distinction and difference between us as believers and everybody else in this world.
Yeah.
And there will be moments where it seems like it's cool to do this thing that everyone else is doing, but as a believer, that's not right. That as a believer, as a Christian, as someone who confesses and professes to love God, that's something that you don't do or partake in. So I think for me, it's recognizing there will be moments where you will feel lonely, right? Where you will feel like you are the only one that believes this. You are the only one that goes to church. You are the only one that is sacrificing and doing so many different things that it just seems like everyone else around you isn't doing.
Yeah.
And it's also important at the same time to recognize that even though, yes, you may be the odd one and you don't fit in because you are a believer and you are a Christian, there is a certain confidence that must be developed in those moments, right? You have to develop this confidence in knowing who you are, right? Who you stand for, what you stand for. And that confidence, I think, has to grow through every circumstance that you go through every group or crowd that you feel like you don't fit in with, right? That should end up growing your confidence and recognizing, you know what? I know who I am. I know what I'm doing this for. I know why I'm sacrificing. I know why I'm not partaking in that. And at the same time, recognizing that in essence, you aren't the only one doing that, right? You probably haven't come across another believer individual who is, doing the same thing like that, or in those certain circumstances. For whatever reason, maybe you guys don't talk about it, but I'm sure, right? Going back, there were other Christians my age experiencing the same thing. There were other Christians your age experiencing probably the same thing, feeling like, I'm supposed to be loved by a certain community, or feel this appreciation, or feel kind of this warmth, and I don't always get that.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes it's easy to forget, you're not the only one that feels lonely. You're not the only one who feels that way. There are a lot of other individuals who actually feel the same way.
Yeah, and I think that, the idea of dedication as well. I remember growing up, I came to the walks of the Lord. That sounds like
the walk,
not walks.
Yeah,
of the Lord. Oprah.
I know, that's exactly what I was thinking. There are many ways to Jesus.
Yes. So the idea that at a very early age, I had a curiosity and a hunger for God, where the majority of the 7-year-olds around me weren't as curious in a way. And I also you have to add on the layer that I had a stepdad who were super mega strict. So the idea of certain kids, I feel like we've spoken about this on the podcast, where, certain kids will come to church with their homework, or they'll come with coloring books and stuff like that. And then during the service, they would just be doodling and doing stuff. That was not the case for me. I had to sit in the first bench in the front and engage or whatever. So that had its pros and its cons as well. But I think that it started to develop a rift for me, where the older folks appreciated me as this star pupil of a kid who was always so dedicated and always so front, but the kids looked at me like I was a weirdo.
Yeah.
So then it developed this weirdness where the adults were like, oh, you're doing so great. Look at him, the example. But the people my age was like, I could never play with them.
Yeah.
You know, it was like I was never going to nobody's house after the service and stuff like that or whatever. So, you know, that did create this weirdness in you where even at that early age, you know, it was kind of like, this is like lonely. You know, and at the end of the day, it's like you said, it does serve a purpose where it does build confidence, because now, you know, at this age, at 34 years of, you know, being 34 years old, I have developed the ability to do it on my own and not have to be one of those people that need a community. Like, I appreciate a community. I love a community. I love the idea of community. But, you know, in the case that I find myself in the season of my life where it is a little lonely, I'm okay. I can tough it out because I've built that confidence and that tough skin.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think another thing that comes to mind in reference to what I wish I knew, right, of my Christian walk back then is the idea that my belief system will be attacked. And when I say that, I mean, you know, what I know to be true about God, what I know to be true about what he says, what I know to be true about his word, all of those things will be attacked. And it won't be attacked in the way of someone telling you, oh, that's not true. Yeah. Right? That's not facts. Or, oh, God isn't real. Because I believe that, at least for me, that wouldn't work. But I noticed and just have come to learn that through different attacks in different areas of my life, ultimately, it wasn't an attack on my friendships. It wasn't an attack on, you know, my peace. It wasn't an attack on my health. It really was, you know, through different life circumstances, attacks on my belief system. Because of what I'm going through right now and this attack and what I've experienced, how does this change what I believe is true about God? And I think oftentimes, you know, we are attacked in so many different ways in so many different, you know, areas of our life. And the attack is not against our family, against our friendship, against our emotions, against our health, our finances. The attack is against our belief system. What we believe is true about God. So because God did not come through for me in the way that I thought, right? I now believe that God doesn't always provide, you know, because I am sick and I've prayed and asked God to heal me and I'm not healed yet. I don't really believe that God is a healer. That is being attacked, right? Because I believe that, you know, God is a God that can do the impossible. But then when I have these circumstances that are just so hard and so difficult and I feel like there's no way out and I feel like I'm all by myself, my belief system of knowing that God can help me is attacked. So ultimately, I think growing up, right, I would be so focused on the attack, so focused on what was being attacked in my life that would kind of take over. And I had to realize this attack is way bigger than just on my health. It's an attack on me believing, is God truly a healer? Right? So I think in our lives, we have to just remind ourselves and keep in mind that the attacks we experience of the enemy day in and day out is not simply an attack on your joy and your peace, on your love for others, but it's an attack on what you believe is true about God, what you believe is true about his character, what you believe is true about what he says in his word. And the minute you begin to doubt your belief system, the minute you begin to doubt what it is you know about God, that takes you down a path that sometimes, you know, will lead you to different moments of just turmoil and confusion and trial and just disbelief that just isn't good. Right? So just recognizing that the attacks we face in our life aren't necessarily just attacks on the things being attacked, but it is an attack on our belief system and what we know to be true about God.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that, you know, is very that hits a subject, which is what I spoke about at the last episode that sparked all this in my mind, which was that, you know, I think that we as a church community, we have such an incredible faith in God and his abilities, his, you know, that he is omnipotent, that he can do all things, and that nothing for him is impossible. And, you know, growing up listening to the idea that we serve a God that will heal you. We
Yeah.
serve a God who will restore you. We serve a God who will do X, who will do Y, who will do Z. I wish that at a younger age I understood not only the idea of hyperbole, but also the fact that it's not always will, and it's sometimes if it's in his will. Which I think is a big difference. You know, when you grow up in church or when you come into your faith and you're hearing all the time, God will do this, and it doesn't happen, that's when you start to question your faith and you start to question your belief, and you start to have these conversations where you start to waver because of the fact that your whole life, or at least for me, my whole life, I grew up knowing God will do X. And I think that there's a difference between God will and God can. You know, he definitely has the ability to. He definitely can do it at the blink of an eye, at the snap of a finger. Will he do it depends on his will and his plans for your life.
Yeah.
But at an early age, when all my time, like all my life, I was always taught he will. There's nothing that's impossible for him. There's nothing that he can't do. So it was kind of like learning how to balance that idea from a very early age to once again. And I feel like, you know, a lot of the things that I wish I knew a lot younger was to help me not fall into that disappointment.
Yeah.
I guess, in my walk, you know, feeling disappointed that why is it that God isn't doing it? Is it because there's something wrong with me? Is it because I'm the problem? Why is it that, you know, so it's the idea of no, it's not. And it's kind of like how you spoke about at the last episode too, which is that God can do those things. And most of the time, if not always, he is operating on that level, but it's in a way that it's not what you think it should be or how you want it to be, but he is operating. So I think, you know, those are the messages that I wish I knew at an earlier age, because it would have I would have benefited from that. And it's a concept that it takes a lot of maturity to understand. You know, it's a concept that takes a lot of, you know, faith to be able to understand that, you know, he can, but whether or not he chooses to is different. It's different. You know, I think it was something that would have been very important.
Absolutely. And it's funny because you touched on a lot of different words that kind of leads into my next one. You know, when we talk about expectation, when we talk about what God can do in our life or what we want him to do, I have, you know, come to learn that our hope is not God's hope. And I think a lot of times, you know, we have that verse in Romans 5 that says that hope does not disappoint, right? And I think oftentimes if you were to look back at your life, you will see moments of disappointment in your life, moments where you hoped for something, hope that something would happen, hope that someone would get healed, hope that someone would get delivered, hope that you would receive peace. But then you look at your circumstance and you realize you didn't get it, or it didn't happen, or what you hoped for did not come to pass. So then it's like, I was left disappointed. I was left upset. I was left discouraged. And having the realization that your hope is not God's hope. I can hope for something and pray about it and believe and trust God for it. But if that is not in God's will or in God's plan or purpose for my life, that thing in which I'm hoping for won't happen, right? But I have to kind of, instead of having this hope that it's what I want, what I believe is best, what I expect, what I want to happen, you need to replace that hope with his hope, right? And understanding that, you know what, I may want this for my life, I may expect this to happen, but I have to be okay with God's plan. I have to be okay with the fact that this may not be in his plan and God may do something different. But when you release your hope and your expectation and you kind of put your hope in a hope that is greater and a hope that is different, you realize again that God's plan is best. Yeah. You realize that, you know what, this is what I wanted to happen. This is what I prayed for and what I clinged on to for so long. But God's plan is always better. And the hope and the goal is that at the end of it all, you realize and come to the understanding that, you know what, this is way better than what I had in mind. This is way better than what I thought was going to happen. This is way better than if I would have done this on my own. So I wish many years ago, right, just growing up in this Christian faith, that I would recognize that your hope is not God's hope, and my hope can never compete with God's hope.
Yeah. You know, and I think that, you know, you're speaking about like God's plan and planning. And, you know, one of the things, the last thing I had on my list was the idea of it would have been great to have been taught or have learned how to balance being a dedicated Christian while being dedicated to yourself. The idea of understanding that, no, you cannot neglect God, and you cannot neglect your ministry, and you cannot neglect your church community, but you also cannot neglect yourself and the things you want to do in life. And I think that there is a happy medium and there's a balancing act that needs to take place. And, I was the type of person growing up who was super mega dedicated to my church. And, and I was dedicated very much to ministry. And, that's my passion. I love to do that type of stuff or whatever. But I also put a lot of personal things and desires and career choices that I wanted to do to the side because, I gave it 110% to the church stuff. And I think that I maybe did a disservice to myself by not being a little bit more, not balancing that scale a little bit better, because, I always feared what I saw, which was you see the people that were, worried about their career and what they wanted to do in life, and they will go full throttle on that and then forget about the Jesus stuff. And then maybe come back years later, like after graduation, after establishing a career, then they maybe do a pop-up. And that was my fear. I fear like I didn't want to do that. Like I didn't want to give so much to my career and my personal wants and plans for myself, that I kind of put that on the back burner to do God's work. And I feel that we as a church community, can speak more on that and the idea that there is a way to effectively do both, to serve 100% in church, but to also serve 100% for yourself.
Yeah, and I think it's important to just understanding the idea of you need to take care of yourself. If you don't take care of yourself, you can't do God's work, right? Yeah. The idea that taking care of yourself and self-care, making sure you are good, is actually a part of the work that God wants you to do. And I think a lot of times we focus a lot on the external. We focus on, the ministry that God gives us, the purpose that God has for our life, and we're busy doing this, we're doing that, we're going here, we're going there. And at the end, we are neglecting ourselves. And what good is it that you are going around spreading the gospel, you are going around doing your ministry, you're going around preaching and saving thousands, but you are crumbling on the inside, right? You yourself are not doing well. So I think that idea of recognizing that you need to take care of yourself, you need to take breaks, you need to recognize that there are other parts of who you are as well, right? And all of that in balance, I think, will ultimately kind of, give you that effectiveness and success that you're looking for. Yeah. And I think if you are that individual right now listening that, you're in your Christian walk, or, regardless of how many years you've been, in church and you've been a Christian, right? I think there's always room for improvement. And you may be going through a lot right now. There may be different things that you're experiencing. And like I said earlier, that verse in Romans 5, it lets us know that we can glory in tribulations because tribulation produces perseverance. Perseverance produces character, and character produces hope. And I think that when we realize, yes, we go through tribulations, the tribulations help us persevere, but it's not just about persevering, right? Because if we stop there, then that's kind of the mentality of I have to make it. You make it to that thing, and then it's like I have to make it to the next, and then I have to make it to the next. But ultimately, your character begins to form and shape, and hopefully you begin to develop this idea of who God is, who God called you to be, and that gives you hope, right? A hope that is different. So I encourage you to just, take a minute to reflect, especially during this holiday season, right? In these next few weeks where it's very busy and there's a lot happening, take a minute and reflect, and just, reflect on maybe the things that you wish you would have known, and how now, will you change, right? That idea or that perspective for yourself and maybe for someone else, right? When you see someone else that same age, or you see someone else kind of doing the same thing or going the same route you did, how now can you influence change in their life?
Yeah, and it's not only about age. You also, you got to think of like spiritual age. There's some people that are adults that are just starting, their faith and their walk with Christ. And those are important things to like keep an eye out and, check in with them on, to better help them, on their journey. So.
Absolutely. So we hope that you enjoyed this episode this week. We know it's a busy time. We know it's a busy season. So just, again, make sure to put the things that are important, put them first, prioritize them, and you can definitely, flourish and grow in this walk for sure. And we thank you for tuning in to today's episode. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at God Life Culture Podcast. You can search for us on YouTube, subscribe to us on all platforms, and continue to come here week after week, especially as we close out this year for all of, our brand new episodes.
Yeah, so once again, thank you for tuning in to the latest episode of the God Life Culture Podcast. That's God Life Culture. Until next time.
See ya.
Bye.